I've started the broadcast, so soon we start getting all the participants on the attendees
Wonderful.
list.
Thank you, Chavinder. I do not have the share screen function.
Courtney, we can see your screen sharing.
Perfect. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. We're just doing final setup. We'll get started in just one moment. Okay, great. We're ready now. Thank you everyone for joining and welcome to this BSI workshop on antimicrobial resistance and the environment. We're happy to have you as a part of the session today where we're going to have a two-part session. The first will be focused on a technical presentation to give an overview of antimicrobial resistance in the environment. And then the second part of the session will be much more workshop. We're going to discuss questions with you in the audience and get your feedback on some of the topics that we'll cover in the session today. So the first thing, if you will, is that all participants will be muted right now, but you can ask questions during the first part of the presentation using the Q&A box. I'll show you where that is in just a moment. The session will be recorded, so we will ensure that this is shared with you afterwards to share with your internal colleagues, and that will be given a follow-up email afterwards with the recording for you to be able to share. We're going to be myself and Manjeet Singh will be the primary presenters for today's presentation, and we will also be joined by Vasudeva Murthy, who will help with the second part of the workshop presentation as well today. So I'm serving as the Global Director for our healthcare team at BSI. Manjeet Singh is a very well-known and expert on the antimicrobial resistance in the environment space. He's ex-director of corporate sustainability for Centrion Pharmaceuticals and very much is our lead person for our Indian counterparts on behalf of BSI now. We're happy to have him as part of this. You can also, as I said, use the chat box here as an image to actually ask questions and interact with us during the first part of the presentation. And the second part of the presentation, you will actually be able to speak and engage with us in the session. But please do use this chat box for any questions that you have as we go through the first part of the presentation. Great. So that's the administrative pieces. Let's get into the detail now. So first, we're going to go over the introduction to the antimicrobial resistance challenge and what are some of the real issues that industry is facing when manufacturing antibiotics. First, just a little bit of information about the global AMR health threat. So the global AMR health threat is very much a public health threat. It has been identified by the World Health Organization as one of the top 10 global health challenges facing humanity today. There was a report by Lancet that said that in 2019, 1.27 million deaths globally were attributed to AMR and antimicrobial bacteria and the resistance to that key bacteria, and potentially as many as contributed towards as many as 5 million deaths in the same year. So this is growing exponentially year on year and potentially could be as many as 10 million deaths by 2050. Unfortunately, there's not just the elderly population who are becoming resistant to key bacteria and antibiotics, but also children. So some of the diseases like infections like sepsis is one that is very much causing some of the children deaths that are resulting from resistance to key antibiotics. And really, there's some key urgency on this topic, one that is multi-sectorial, but today we're going to be really focusing on the human health antibiotics side of the issue. So there's lots of ways that AMR presents itself and considerations that cause antimicrobial resistance. The first is in a hospital setting where you actually are overprescribing and potentially us as patients are overusing antibiotics. It also takes place in an animal health setting where antibiotics are used for poultry, beef, shrimp, fish, and actually used to prevent infection in our food that we eat. And then finally, also, there's a risk of antimicrobial resistance being attributed to the source of manufacturing waste emissions. So we are here to talk about this last area, looking at manufacturing of antibiotics and where waste is created and discharged from manufacturing facilities into public waste streams, and then ultimately can cause resistance to us as patients. So I just want to be very clear on the scope of this session and the workshop that we're going to embark on. So it's very much a call to action and also one that requires a true One Health approach. So this slide here does talk about exactly where and how from the antibiotic manufacturing process, the waste is discharged into often a wastewater treatment facility. The discharge then is treated and goes into the receiving water, which then can potentially enter into soil, going into manure from a farm environment. There's also storage of that, which ultimately can be used to also treat livestock. So there's a need, like I mentioned, to have this One Health approach, looking at human health antibiotic manufacturing as well as animal health manufacturing. But we are again going to really focus on the human health side during this presentation. In relation to the Indian context and antibiotic supply chain and some of the potential impacts, you can see here some of the actual antibiotic drugs out on the marketplace and the percentage of antibiotics that are used in the market. So you can see penicillin, for example. I'm sure you've had penicillin as a patient to treat infections. It's a common generic antibiotic out on the marketplace now. Antibiotic use is on the rise. It's a common way to treat and prevent bacterial infections in patients. And also it's really significantly rising in India, with at least 30% increase in the per capita use in the last decade. And it's really causing a big concern. And resistance is not a maybe will happen in an Indian context, but it is already happening and causing deaths in the Indian market context currently. So really, I think the main cause for us today is to look at the manufacturing environment and ensure that we're countering that resistance as much as we can by controlling some of the key waste streams. So now I will ask my colleague Manjeet Singh, who will come over to talk to us a little bit further about the Indian market context and some of the up and coming legislation and government policies here. Manjeet, over to you.
Thank you, Gutney. Hello, everyone. So I will take you through the global antibiotic supply chain perspective with India. Addressing AMR is especially very important for India region, being we are the global pharmacy. We supply generic medicines, or particularly we talk about antibiotics now. So because of AMR, there is much focus with increasing pressure coming from various stakeholders. For example, supply chain pressure comes AMR alliance members who are expecting their suppliers to be compliant with framework or AMR standard now, and PNEX, which are the safe limits to discharge wastewater after treatment. And also there is also possible inclusion of environment aspect in GMP. For example, WHO has included the guidance in their Annexure 6. So it is a guidance now, and it could become a legislation or mandatory requirement coming years. And sustainable procurement already certain insurance companies, insurers like in German, AOK, and also Nordic countries, they have put up environment criteria for procurement of medicine. In addition to that, the new development which is happening in Europe is pharma legislation revision. In the pharma legislation revision, so there is a procurement criteria, is environment performance of a supplier, and which very well includes AMR as well. So these are pressure, these are requirement, I would say, in view of AMR to address it as a part of One Health program. So government of India has taken action steps in that direction. The first one is they have come up with National Action Plan, and the revised National Action Plan will be soon out, and it talks about uh, environment in the manufacturing area. So if you look at, we will talk about legislation, let's say in the next slides, but in 2020, the CPCB have come up with a draft environment standard. And basically, I believe it largely caused by many reports which were into the global media as well as national media about the antibiotic pollution in and around Hyderabad or Indian journal. Okay, so that is led to national action plan and also including let's say antibiotic limits into the antibiotics into the draft legislation. Okay, and later on I think there was a consultation process. After consultation process, the legislation was approved, and this environment draft was approved in 2021. And but those antibiotics limits to discharge the wastewater into any water body or further application was dropped. The reason was lack of sufficient scientific development and also pressure from industry review of cost and let's say other complications. So I believe this is not just dropped; it would be coming back very soon. We will discuss later. And my belief is that by next year we can see again back the limit for antibiotics in environment standard, which is approved by CPCB. Indian Government Pollution Control Board, in fact, this industry is into two categories. We know it very well. Formulation falls in orange category, so not mandatory to have ZLD, but there is similar standard applies for the final treated wastewater, which is released into environment. And on API, it falls in a red category. It again depends state to state. Majority of the states has put ZLD as a mandatory condition for consent, whereas few states are still more considerate, or the ZLD is not really a mandatory for that. Yeah. Indian government policy indication we talked about. There was a discussion, huge discussion started in somewhere 2019, which still continues. And if we look at the iteration, I spoken about that there was draft environment standard, which was out for consultation, and consultation happened in 2021. And in this consultation, all the drug manufacturing association, IDMA, BDMA, OPPI, and IPA, and other stakeholders, they have really participated into that and given their perspective. And thereafter, as I spoke previously, the antibiotic limits, even the definition of zero liquid discharge will also dropped out. And as I said, the reason which was cited that the sense is PNAC sense, that is PNAC is basically safe limits for discharge of wastewater from manufacture of antibiotics, is still evolving. So they would like to have more deep insight before bringing back those antibiotic discharge limits into the standard. And there's another important development which is happening in 2021, a National Green Tribunal, which is a nodal body in India, constitutional body in India on environment. So they got a complaint from one of the civil society organization, NGO known as Veteran for Transparency, about antibiotic pollution in Badi area. And They cited certain analytical results before NGT, and NGT has clearly sent an order to CPCB to include antibiotic assessment based on mass balance as per AMR Industry Alliance methodology or standard. So that NGT order has been challenged by CPCB in the Supreme Court. I believe these proceedings, legal proceedings, are still going on. The anticipation is there's a high probability that these antibiotics limits would be back into the standard, and you will see, the legislation will really, other than supply chain pressure, would also be making it mandatory that we stick to these antibiotic release limits. So there's a high probability, and I believe, it could happen next year. Yeah. Thank you. Then I hand over to now Kutni. She will be taking you through standard and certification. Kutni, please.
Thank you, Ranveet. Thank you very much. And before we jump into this next section, could we please have our first poll? We're going to ask you some question now. If we could have our first poll. Great. So the first poll is related to awareness. So are you aware of the AMR challenge in the manufacturing context? If you could please just answer one of those options here on the screen about your level of awareness of the antimicrobial resistance challenge and where and how that impacts the manufacturing of antibiotics. If you could please review and answer that question for us. And I will just take a quick look at the answers as they come through. Great, we'll just wait another minute. Oh, okay, so we've got, I could say, a proportion of the audience that is aware of this issue in the manufacturing context, and also some that are just really starting to gain their awareness of the manufacturing issue in the context with which that applies. So thanks for your participation. I appreciate you answering the question. That's going to be poll 1 of 3, so get ready for the next ones when they come. Great. So as Manjeet was outlining, there is draft regulation, there's some governance related to the Pollution Control Board, but what can you do as industry now? How can you take proactive action to really understand the manufacturing environment and how you can control your waste streams, both liquid and solid waste streams coming from your antibiotic production? And we, BSI, have been engaged with a number of different industry standards, industry stakeholders to actually develop a comprehensive way to standardize and also to ultimately independently verify that you're conforming to an industry standard. So rewind about 3 years ago now, we engaged with the pharmaceutical industry as well as academics and policymakers to understand what is the challenge of wastewater discharge in a manufacturing environment, and how do we make sure that we start to mitigate that risk so that we can mitigate the ultimate resistance that could come from this challenge. After we recognized the challenge and agreed that something needs to be done, and what was really the call to action was a development of a standard. And this development of the standard was done through BSI as the national standards body for the United Kingdom, a founding member of ISO, International Standards Organization. And really the standard is a specification standard, a way to actually outline how you would measure the discharge concentrations of antibiotics coming from your manufacturing site into the surrounding aquatic environment, and how you would calculate the PEC and arrive at the predicted no effect concentration, the PNEC, and also what controls and processes need to be in place in order for you to manage the waste coming from your manufacturing facility when manufacturing antibiotics. So we developed this measurement and process standard. It is now called the Antibiotic Manufacturing Standard, and worked closely with the AMR Industry Alliance, a trade association of pharmaceutical organizations that really were driving change in this space in action. So after that standard was developed, we'd realized what would be needed after the standard was developed. So we brought the ecosystem back together. We brought policymakers, health system procurers, license holders and tier one manufacturers, as well as members of their supply chain, to say what else is needed to help counter this challenge around resistance. And the answer was an assessment, an independent assessment to determine whether or not manufacturers were conforming to the industry standard. So we developed an assessment model. So we decided if we, BSI, using our global assurance and assessment capabilities, where we certify manufacturers in a number of different standards like 14,001 environmental management or 45,001 health and safety, we decided we needed an assessment model specifically to assess antibiotic production and the waste discharge processes. So we developed an assessment model and we went through several iterations. I think there was a multilateral consultation process and went back and forth through a number of workshops. I think by the time we got to the first draft of this and did the final review, it was draft version 15. So it was definitely a multi-iteration process with lots of different technical inputs into how we would carry out an assessment that's consistent. I think what we realized in this assessment model creation is a number of the manufacturers of antibiotics were doing this slightly differently. Some were doing a mass balance calculation to understand their dilution rates. Some were doing a sampling and analysis approach to understand how they were actually discharging and the concentration levels of that discharge. Some also had a zero liquid discharge model, like a lot of the Indian manufacturers, where there was a claim of zero discharge coming from their facility, so no waste coming, and it was a circular system. So we had to really accommodate lots of different models of assessing concentration and looking at discharges from antibiotic production. So when we finally got to this point, we had a final review, again, version 15, and we decided we would pilot the assessment before we went to do a global rollout. And we piloted this assessment in multiple geographies across 8 different antibiotic products in 8 different locations. India was one of the pilot sites. We had it in Europe, in UK, Ireland, a number of different locations. We also had contract manufacturing organizations as a part of the pilot. We had generics organizations as a part of the pilot. We had innovative pharma organizations as a part of the pilot. We had API sites and we had drug product sites. So we made sure that we had a number of different representative sample of the industry and how they're producing antibiotics in order to ensure that the certification and assessment process was robust and all-encompassing for human health antibiotics. So we then deployed this certification. It officially launched in June of this year, where now we have a way to actually certify individual antibiotics at drug product and API stage, which I will get into in the next slides. And ultimately, we admit that this is probably not the all perfect solution. This will always revise and evolve as science evolves. So we are constantly horizon scanning. I'm in fact here in India today to actually look at the current environment around antimicrobial resistance in the environment and some of the policy objectives and where India is evolving in this space to make sure we're taking these learnings back into our assessment, back into our standard to continue to evolve and change as the process and science evolves on the ground and in all geographies. So here's a little bit more detail about the standard before we get further into the assessment process. Again, the purpose of this standard is really to reduce the potential risk of the development of antibiotic resistance and the risk of aquatic surface water ecotoxicity. And so that is very much focusing on how can we be more advanced in how we're carrying out the standardization about how the industry looks at antibiotic production. So we had a huge amount of success when we launched the standard in June of 2022. Had media coverage from Reuters and Bloomberg and Stat News, and really the first true standardization process and the antimicrobial resistance topic, specifically AMR in the environment. It was a big gap before this standard was launched, and one that we feel like we have initially solved. So again, once the standard was launched, we went through the certification. So here's really what we do when we go and embark on the certification process. The ultimate test is that we're looking at the predicted no effect concentration, the PNEC. That's the test. Are you meeting the ratio quotient of less than 1? As in, is the concentration of your discharge of antibiotics in the mixing zone less than 1? If it's more than 1, you will not become certified. That's just a very key basic test that we are running. We're also looking to see how you're conforming to the standard. So there's a set of requirements that's laid out in the industry standard, and we're making sure we assess against the different clauses of the standard. We're also looking at environmental management systems, so some of the processes and clauses in the ISO 14001 standard, but not all of them. And 14001 certification is not a mandatory requirement, just planning, operations, performance valuation, and continual improvement. So we are making sure that you're continuing to evolve your processes and procedures. If you are conforming to the standard, if your RQ is less than 1, if you have these management controls in place, then we are going to look at certification for you on your site for your antibiotic product. So a little bit more detail, because we get asked, how do we roll this out? So I guess the question ultimately is that we're going through a multi-stage process for assessment. The first is a virtual stage 1 assessment, which is really to get to know your site and your production process for antibiotic that you're looking to certify. So it's really a documentation review, understanding your waste process, your mass balance calculation, and also, what is your wastewater treatment process, or what is your zero liquid discharge process. So that's the first stage 1 assessment. Then once we have an understanding of what happens at your site, we come and do an on-site assessment to verify the effectiveness of those procedures and look at actually the batch records and controls you have in place, your mass balance calculation, we verify to make sure it's accurate, and that ultimately this either mass balance and or your sampling analysis approach does lead to the calculation of meeting the PNEC. Again, we do understand the Indian context here and have accommodated a model to actually do the assessment for zero liquid discharge. So we are looking and understand that, in fact, if it is a clear circular system, that we're looking at where leakages could occur, how you're maintaining your technology, where in fact the coolant system is tested to make sure that, and again, there are not leakages. And if there are any treated water coming from your site, how and where is it being used? So after we do the stage 2 assessment, we determine if there are any non-conformities that need to be raised, major or minor non-conformities, where if major, we require evidence that there's a formal corrective action process, and we will carry out an additional assessment to confirm they're effective. And after the non-conformities are closed, we will make a recommendation for certification. You will see very soon some news about certificates being issued related to this program of work. So keep your eyes peeled in the near coming days about certificates being issued on this program. And after the initial assessment in year 1, we will then maintain an annual check, an annual surveillance assessment. So it's not just like we come, check once, and we're gone for 3 years. We come each year to check that you have been maintaining the ongoing compliance and capability. So the certification is valid for 3 years, just to be very clear. And again, we are certifying either your API stage at a specific site or the final drug product stage at a specific site. So I'll get on to this next. But before I do, can we maybe ask a question just related to the standard? So can we potentially have poll number 2, please, here brought onto the screen? So poll number 2 is asking us, if we'll get that up on the screen for you. I appreciate if you could answer the question that's posed here based on your experience. Are you aware of and are you embedding the antibiotic manufacturing standard requirements in your manufacturing processes for antibiotics? Are you aware of the antibiotic manufacturing standard and are you embedding it into your site? So we'll give you a moment. There's a few different answers that maybe you're aware and fully embedded, you're aware, but partially embedded potentially, not yet aware. So if you could answer those questions, that would be helpful just to get an understanding of the level of awareness in the local context, please. That would be great. We'll give you another minute or so to answer this. Okay, let's see what kind of results we have here. I'm going to really quickly go check these, one moment. Great. It looks like we have quite a variety of responses here on the poll. So some level of awareness, fully aware, and some who have just not yet heard of it. So I guess there's a good mix here and room for us to raise the awareness further within the Indian market context, but also I'm happy to hear that there is some level of awareness and embedding of the standard already in place. So one of the reasons why we get involved in the certification is for you as manufacturers to be able to evidence the good practices you have around waste and environmental controls, but also to meet your customer requirements. So there is an evolution here of procurement customer requirements coming down through the global supply chain, both to license holders as well as to individual supply chain members. So I'm going to go over those as the next part of this presentation. The first is the Nordics region, so that's Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. The 5 countries have come together to create their next antibiotic tender for their national health system. So the national health system in Norway or Sweden, etc. And they've come together to set a set of requirements for their antibiotic tenders to procure antibiotics for their domestic national market and patients. And those tenders are now live from my understanding, and they are waiting for the environmental part of those tenders. So quality, price, safety, all of those parts are part of the requirements for the tender, but also environment, which is a really key new area. And the weighting is 30%. 30% of the weighting for the Nordics tender is directly corresponding to the environmental clauses. So we have been engaged with them, and they actually are now evidencing the highest score for complying with the tender for the environmental area is attributed to being conforming to the antibiotic manufacturing standard and being independently certified to that standard. So you get the highest 10 points score on the question related to, there are 7 questions, and one of the questions is related to conformance with the standard and independently certifying. So there's a driver now commercially to have an advantage of 30% weighting of your antibiotic tenders if you're supplying into the Nordic region. So something to ask your customers about. Additionally, NHS England, so the UK National Health System, is also piloting in 2022 and are in consultation for their antibiotic subscription model for novel antibiotics now as we speak. And in this pilot program, you can see that it did also reference demonstrating compliance via independent assessment to the AMR Industry Alliance standard. So again, it does not explicitly mention certification, but I'm already seeing manufacturers who are going for certification as their evidence of an independent assessment to conform with the NHS England health system requirements. So again, that has about 10% weighting currently and could evolve over time. So one of the things both health systems, Nordics as well as the NHS and others who we are speaking with, have really wanted to make sure that supply chain transparency is at the center of the antibiotic environmental controls so that we can make sure that not just the finished drug product, the one that is licensed to be serviced into the markets, but also the API is also evidenced of good environmental controls and waste controls when being manufactured. So one of the things that we have made sure with the certification program is that you will have not only the certificate that says drug product created by X license holder is certified at a site in Ireland, for example, but you will also be able to show if the related API at a site in India, for example, has also been certified. So you can make the supply chain transparency on the certification and show that so that when you and your customers engage with the national health systems that we've mentioned before, you'll be able to see the supply chain transparency and of good environmental practices. So it's very critical for the health systems and also for your customers or manufacturers supplying into this health systems. And also the health systems are able to independently validate the validity of the certificate through an independent and open portal. So if you search for manufacturer ABC, and you can pull up their certificates, one of which could be the kite mark for antibiotic certification. So again, the supply chain transparency is open source, so you can check on your supply chain members, or also your customers can check to see if you have been certified. So there's a way to promote that through using this link to the portal. So supply chain transparency and conclusion of API and drug product, the whole supply chain of that antibiotic is indeed certified to good environmental and waste controls, ultimately mitigating the resistance of antimicrobial resistance. So we've gone over now, I would say, how we embarked on the standard development, the assessment process to certify and assess the waste control and discharge processes for manufacturing sites. We've gone over some of the drivers related to health system procurement that are commercially incentivizing good environmental practices within antibiotic production, and also the supply chain transparency. Now we're going to get into the technical detail. And so for you as manufacturers, we're going to try to give a little bit of an overview of what it would require for a technical detail around waste discharge and actually calculating mass balance as well. So again, I'm going to turn over to Manjeet Singh, if I can, to actually review this and give some of the technical overview.
Thank you very much, Whitney. So in this technical session, I will take you through various antibiotic emission pathways to environment from factory. Then we will be talking about safe limits spec PNAC, and thereafter we will talk about how to where the pack is calculated and what are those various ways, for mass balance analytical method, and eventually how it boils down to how this entire technical process is examined, introspected during certification process, and eventually certificate is issued, granted for that particular antibiotics. So first slide, I'll take you through antibiotic emission pathways. See, the standard is largely applicable to the wastewater streams, liquid one, and it also do apply to solid waste, but that is limited to the national requirement to handle solid waste. So I will take you through those pathways. Usually every site have wastewater treatment plant, and then certain sites and common effluent treatment plant, they do have, let's say, off-site third-party treatment arrangements. So I'll take you through on-site wastewater treatment plant, and also this one describes about a process of zero liquid discharge. So usually it has three treatment. The first one is primary treatment, and the primary treatment actually entails high dissolved solids, ITDS, and they are usually processed like mechanical vapor recompressor or multi-effect evaporator is applied, where The usually all antibiotics, which are in dissolved form, as well as the salts, they are removed, and usually they are dried in a thin film dryer. Eventually, they find the way to find the way to landfill. In the landfill, whatever solid is removed from a thin film dryer, it is handled as per national legislation. So usually these landfills are leach proof in order to prevent leaching to the groundwater to avoid AMR as well and also other pollution. So whatever water comes up after primary treatment, and also low TDS stream, they go to the secondary treatment, which is biological treatment, where bacteria actually degrade its on the organic matter, where most of the COD, BOD, and ammonical nitrogen is removed. Then it moves to the tertiary treatment. Here, when we look at after secondary treatment, and some of the facility, they have only biological treatment, they won't have tertiary treatment. From where, you look at arrow down the line, it goes either to river, sea, or other water bodies from after secondary treatment. But certain facilities, they have tertiary treatment. This is basically to remove suspended solid, it's ultra filtration unit, and thereafter it is followed by reverse osmosis unit, which is removal of dissolved solids. So largely, if there are any antibiotics which is left over in the biological treatment, they are removed during these two further tertiary treatment like ultrafiltration as well as reverse osmosis filtration. Eventually, water moves out of wastewater treatment plant. And this point, after ROB card end of the pipeline, and it either recycled back or it goes to water bodies, for example, river, sea, or lake. And in India, certain places, it is also applied to land. We will talk later and how does this standard applies to this discharge to environment. Usually on offsite third party, the primary treatment is done at factory level, and thereafter, after primary treatment, the wastewater is transmitted to or transported to common effluent treatment plant. Wherever industry have, certain industry cluster or park, they have CETP, and certain industry parks, they have few units of, let us say, pharmaceutical manufacturing. So they are based, usually goes to sewage treatment plant at a common place where municipal sewage is treated. So there are two ways, at third party. So after this treatment, it largely has more or less similar what we talked on site. The water eventually gets discharged into river, sea, other water bodies. So now, the point of mixing, where water released from either from on-site wastewater treatment plant or from off-site, it mixes into the water body, river or ocean. So that is the main point, where selection pressure is created, and it's important to measure PEC PEC, predicted effective concentration, actual concentration of the antibiotic. And that selection pressure basically causes microbial resistant bacteria which is present over there. So that's very important point where PEC PNAC applies, and also risk quotient is calculated over there. Now we will talk. Slide is not. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, slide was a bit stuck. What is safe discharge condition as per AMR standard? So AMR standard talks about, we will talk first of the key principle. The key principle is risk quotient. In the entire, as Putney said in the previous slide, it's a comparative of PEC and PNAC, and that should be less than 1. That is the entire crux of certification or audit process. That's basic ground line entire whatever other, let's say, systems, environmental system, wastewater treatment, that should facilitate to get the RQ less than 1. Okay, that's key principle. Now we will talk about predicted environment concentration pack. This is a concentration of chemical which is calculated by using modeling. In here, let's say we talk about antibiotic. Let's be very specific. And when we talk about modeling, it is mass balance and measurement. So mass balance, we will talk later in the next slide how we do it. And also measurement, it means the analytical testing of water to measure antibiotic concentration. Predicted no effect concentration PNAC is concentration of a chemical, here in case concentration of antibiotic, below which adverse effect in the environment are not expected to happen. That means it is safe discharge limit in case of antibiotic manufacturing factory or water discharge from wastewater treatment plant, which will not create a selection pressure so that bacteria goes resistant. Okay, so that's a safe limit. I hope I could make it clear, difference between PAC and PNAC. So where do we check PAC? This is just pictorial depiction, just go to the process flow diagram from a manufacturing unit. So what we get when we add raw material, we get finish API, we get API or FDF, and there is API losses to solid and unknown API losses to wastewater treatment plant, and then water goes to wastewater treatment plant, and there it eventually get discharged into river, canal, lake, ocean, and eventually this part is known as mixing zone part. And this mixing zone is, as we talked in the previous slide, is where we need to check the pack. But you look at end of pipeline, at the end of when we make a measurement testing, the samples are filled from end of the pipeline, and rest of there are formulas calculation which is used to calculate concentration during the mixing zone. In this slide, we will talk about how the pack is determined. The pack is basically a quantification of API losses to wastewater, and this is done by two methods like mass balance and or analytical testing. It could also be done in a combination. And it applies various factors, like we will go step by step, applying appropriate API removal efficiency, wastewater by wastewater treatment, dilution factors, and all these factors are standard, very well established, and they are sometimes site specific. When I say site specific, it all pertaining to the flow of water in a water body, okay, at the ultimate discharge point into the receiving environment. So key steps are mass balance. When we go for mass balance, let's say either it is API or it's a formulation unit. So we go through scrutinization happens based on the batch record reviews happen, okay. And usually in the BPR, we capture the yield. We know very well the theoretical yield. We know very well what is yield we received in hand, let's say material fact. The gap is basically a kind of, let's say, loss which happens. So it is also calculated on a largest campaign. For example, if you are producing 4 products in a one plant, so product changes after 1 month or 1.5 months, so largest campaign is to be taken for loss calculation. And then analytical testing method, certain organization, they have developed analytical method to check antibiotic contents in the wastewater. And let me also remind you that analytical testing is not mandatory as per AMR standard. So it is usually API manufacturer, because it's very complex, they follow testing method. Yeah, that can also be used in combination with mass balance. But the mass balance is a basic requirement for certification for, let's say, to establish compliance with AMR standards. So that's the basic thing. And then that water moves wastewater treatment plant, and that treatment usually remove most of the API, as we talked of primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. So that efficiency either should be established, that could only be done through testing or via relevant published research paper can also be used. That's why certain sites they prefer to do largely API to do a analysis or testing measurement of API contents or antibiotics content in the wastewater stream. Yeah, but as per standard, if there is no proof available for establishing the concentration end of the pipeline, or there's no research paper, so the API removal efficiency doesn't apply. So thereafter, water moves into water body. In the receiving water, dilution factors are applied over there. For example, if there is a known flow of a river, so that flow is applied in a river, that flow is used for it. And if it goes to sea and the sea factor is used, lake factor is used, even the land application factor is used, usually if those volumes are not available, flow data is not available, then standard factor like 10 per river means whatever concentration you achieve end of the pipeline, you can simply, let's say, divide by 10. For ocean, it is 100, and for land, it is 20. That is how you eventually calculate PEC. And this PEC, as we talked in the previous, is compared with PNAC. So it gives you the risk quotient, and it should be less than 1. Now we'll show you how the mass balance is done. For example, it's a complete example here. 100 kg is raw material, and let's say yield is 200 kgs, and we got 180 kg API in hand, and there are no losses. We know it very well. Those losses happened as a flow sweep into the filters, into other processes. Is about, let's say, 6 kg, and 14 kg losses are unknown. So these unknown losses, other than a little estimation about loss into air, they are considered to be, they goes to the wastewater treatment plant or go into waste. And thereafter, if there is a recovery process to remove that API, so let's say 10.5 kg recovered over here, and then eventually 3.5 kg API moves to, or antibiotics goes to on-site wastewater treatment plant, and you see stream coming from other plants inside the factory, other unit, right? And then eventually in certain organization, the waste water from the wastewater treatment plant goes to public sewage treatment. You apply factor over there, like in the city, is almost about, I believe, 10 million liters. Yeah, and that is the dilution factor. The first factor applies, then thereafter it moves to the river or sea. So example here is for river. Let's say the river has flow of 100 million liters, and that is the second dilution factor that eventually gives you a calculation. If you look at in this example, so there is this calculation given. The pack is, let's say, 17.2. It's a bit hypothetical example, these values. And here a comparative. This is the final pack value which has to be measured against, compared against PNAC in order to check RQ. So RQ less than 1 is definitely established that there is compliance to AMR industry means, sorry, AMR standard, and that is important for granting certification. It establishes that the particular unit which is producing antibiotic doesn't pose a threat for development of AMR in the water. So that's all from my side, but I want to add one or two more comments here, largely at manufacturing units or manufacturing, they have concerns, when you want to go comply with AMR standard, it means cost. Yeah. So that's one question. Cost in terms of capital investment, cost in terms of running those operations. So in that, I would like to say, if you look at this mass balance or analytical testing provides you this standard, I would say, provides you ample opportunity to look back deeply into your process and look at the avenues how to recover this product. I have practically seen some of our units where we really applied, where we really benefited two ways. A, we found that we were over treating, incurring more cost, and we gone to a process which were really appropriate and fit for it, saving on cost. A, B, the second part is we also found certain ways and means to reduce losses. Production losses means enhancing your yield, so commercial benefit. Third benefit, which I would talk, is not directly on your cost, but on your sales side, sales and marketing side. Kutni talked about various requirements, coming from Nordic countries, UK, EU legislation, and others. So when you have a sustainable produced product, definitely you have a good customers, or who are sustainability oriented, who love to have their product AMR free. So that helps you to A, to get you more premium when you sell product. B, if you are a second supplier to your customer, you get more volume, and you could also be among the first supplier to your customer. So use this standard, first of all, to prevent AMR, which is a bigger issue for humanity. But on the other side, you can very well use this standard to promote your brand value, your brand name. So thank you very much. I will hand over to Kutni to summarize further. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjeet. I think that was a very good summary as to the benefits at the end of there, and I appreciate also your technical expertise that you've added related to the topic. It's not an easy thing calculating the PEC and arriving at your ratio quotient, so that was a very good in-depth description that I think will help some of the manufacturers with this process, so thank you. So we have one more poll question, but before we do, I'll summarize a lot of people say, so now what? We've gotten lots of information about the challenge around antimicrobial resistance, the challenge that it is a global public health threat, and that you as manufacturers of antibiotics can help mitigate that threat by controlling your waste discharge processes. And we talked about the standard of best practice and ultimately an independent way that you're conforming to that standard through assessment and certification. And then also give some technical overview. So what now? What would you do now? So the first I would say is very much to download the standard and review that in relation to your internal processes. How are you doing now in conforming to the standard, and determine your readiness for compliance. You can then secondly register your interest to learn more about the certification and how that could potentially apply to your antibiotic product portfolio. And then, as Manjeet mentioned, informing your relevant stakeholders, both internally and externally, about your intention to become certified to ensure that you're getting that value. So, summary and time for action, and then we're going to transition into a hopeful virtual workshop. We're going to see how this goes. So first is, as we mentioned, it is very much a global health challenge with dire consequences now, not maybe. We're experiencing them in India, and have heard it from a number of stakeholders here related to personal cases where it is causing deaths. There are lots of different causes of antimicrobial resistance. We talked about overprescribing or overuse of antibiotics, the animal health element of this, but in this context, we're very much focusing on manufacturing emissions and waste emissions as one of the potential sources of antibiotics in the environment, and then ultimately as a cause for resistance as well. I think the statistic is 85% of all API is coming from India or China. So India is a very major supply of antibiotics to the global pharmaceutical market, both global as well as a domestic concern. So the environmental controls and helping with mitigating pollution as well as resistance, and then the future regulation and legislation coming hopefully in the Indian context soon will also be a major way to address this issue. The antibiotic manufacturing standard and the PNECs that are outlined in that standard is a really good best practice direction. So if you're lost at where to start or how to embark on this, I very much encourage you to look at and download the standard. PSCI, it's a pharmaceutical supply chain initiative, is also another area where supplier AMR awareness is being raised. So encourage you to look at that for tools and training. They're a great organization that helps here. So that's just a summary, is that we really can gain trust from customers and external stakeholders by conforming with the standard and achieving certification for your antibiotic portfolio. So thank you very much for listening.
One
yeah,
point
go
I
on,
want
Ranjit,
to
go
add.
on.
Yeah,
Finish
one
us off.
point this came to my mind, since I come from industry. So certification, it is a one document which takes care of all your worries. Why? If you're supplying to an insurance company in Europe, they ask for environment criteria. If you supply to Nordic countries, maybe requirement of new European Union revised pharma legislation. I believe this document will become a single document. You can show this document and you get full marks, So you need not to worry, send various responses, various answers, even to your customer. Some of your customer would be asking your AMR's status. Are you compliant to AMR standard or not? So this helps a lot. Yeah. So that is eventually
one-stop
like
shop. Yeah, exactly.
One-stop. Thank you.
That would be the ideal, right? That's what we're working towards. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to transition to questions now. So great points in time there. Let me stop sharing my screen if I can for a moment. We're working on two screens here, so bear with me. Stop sharing. There we go. Great. All right. So let's first look. I think we got some questions in the chat here. But yes, let's have a question from Dr. Manish. Go ahead.
So, when we have the standards, I think this will hold good for both AMR Industry Alliance or BSI. There are two certifications, right? So either of them would do it.
It's one certification. For both. No, so it's the standard. Their standard was helped and created by the Industry Alliance, and then the certification is testing conformance to the standard.
So now it's an expensive process to get a certification. So would you, for example, I'm the manufacturer, I would have a BSS certification, but would the people who supply to me may not have the certification, right? Then is there any kind of a system you're thinking about to make sure that it is the entire chain of the value chain should be having the compliance?
It's a really good question. So I'll pull this deck up over here, but one of the things we looked at when we were embarking on the certification was the supply chain transparency element. So being able to showcase not only that the finished drug product was potentially certified and had the right environmental waste controls in place, but also the API. So we're actually, for example, the license holders supplying into national health systems can show that they indeed have the certificate, but also we can connect the two certificates between the API manufacturer and the drug product manufacturer, so you can see the transparency of supply. It's exactly one of the questions I engaged with one of the health systems. I'll keep anonymous. They said if we had asked for something 18 months ago, it would be exactly this link of transparency that they would need to know, because it's great that drug product is certified, but less risk than API, right? Where waste can be created, loss can happen much more significantly in an API manufacturing environment than a drug product manufacturing environment. Yeah, so good question. We get that a lot, so makes sense. Fantastic. I think we have still a number of people online, and we're going to see if we can potentially transition to this quasi-virtual workshop and see how we go here. I would ask that we maintain agility through this process because we are working with both in-person and online representation. So I'm going to once again share my screen, and I will ask if Chavender and our facilitation support can also help with understanding who is asking a question. So we did have one question that came directly from the audience, and it was related to the question around if you're RQ and zero liquid discharge. So how do you arrive at RQ less than 1 if a zero liquid discharge facility?
Okay.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think this is one of the questions which circle back to us every time. And see, in that case, in case of zero liquid discharge, it's very important to first of all establish to do mass balance. I know once you do a mass balance, you know what are the losses happening, but on zero liquid discharge has a principle that nothing moves out of the facility either to water body or to the soil. So I think that it should be accomplished by, or it should be supported by risk assessment. So there is possibility, for example, breakdown happening in zero liquid discharge. How do you take care? A, B. There would be challenge to the zero liquid discharge. In case of rainy seasons, the rate of evaporation is very low. So the demand to take this water back to system cooling tower, which are the large water consuming equipment, that goes down. But to do with that surplus water, okay. And the third one, in case of your production volumes get reduced or they won't run as per the capacity, how do you manage then zero liquid discharge facility? So once you establish those risk, identify risk and do a risk assessment, and I think then it can be very well on this logic, reasoning can be established that nothing flows out of let's say zero liquid discharge facility, and then we can, in my view, consider that RQ is less than 1 in that case. So risk assessment has to happen very importantly. Secondly, zero liquid discharge is one of the most sophisticated water treatment plant. So I would really encourage that to test this water, although it is not part in the standard, but it's my opinion that you test it 2 or 3 times in a year to establish that the treatment is effective. It removes all the antibiotics, and that's important to support your zero liquid discharge certain data. And the last part, when you in a zero liquid discharge, there would be solid generated, and which would be removing antibiotics to this entire system, right? So it's also important to run a risk assessment around that these are also getting disposed of as per the national regulation. So that will address your RQ less than 1 question. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's a very good point. I'm just looking, it sounds like we also have some additional questions that I'm going to pull up here again on the screen.
This question from audience.
Yeah, let's from the audience. All right, Simon, go for it.
So this is from Louise Norton-Smith, who seems to be having technology problems. But she asks, are there any gaps in the innovation technology or products that would help manufacturers accelerate their ability to comply with certifications or standards? And there's a second part to that, or might make a difference in reducing the costs of controlling antibiotic residues, so it's more attractive to companies whose profit margins are so tight. So I guess there's 2 parts. The first part, are there any gaps in innovation technology or products? And the second part then, is related then to reducing the costs associated with certification.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the things I'll comment, and we'll maybe also come over to Manjeet or Vasudeva if you have any thoughts there too, is one of the major areas where investment is happening is around the best available technology to treat and to control discharge from facilities. So they call it BAT now, I think,
BAT,
BAT for short now, right? And I think innovation and some of the, I guess, some of the environments that we've been looking at already today around innovators with technology are probably some of the key sources of the most novel technology. But I think I would want to also potentially turn this question to the audience. So we have some members from the industry who are actually live in this room virtually with us. And so one of the things I would like to ask is, I think we're all now off mute. So if we may try to see if we could have any of the audience members make a question on the first point that Louise has asked. Louise Norton-Smith works for the UK Department of Health, and one of the reasons that we are here is to try to understand where India and UK collaboration and investment can be made around things like technology and innovation in technology. So may I ask potentially, and this is a brave, if anyone from the audience would want to potentially comment on the question that came to us today related to what are some examples of the technology that is being used in your manufacturing sites that is helping control and treat wastewater from your antibiotic production? First part of the question. Let's focus, or gaps in technology even. So what technology is being used, and also if there are any gaps in technology that we may need to fund innovation to. So I will pause now, and I'm going to leave us silent for a moment while we give opportunity for the online participants to come in and vocalize. Are there any gaps in technology? Please feel free to speak up. We've got one from the audience. Go on, Mandy. What do you think?
I'm new to this area, so I apologise for my naivety, but how much knowledge do we have about the rates of breakdown of these products and the impact of environmental conditions? So, and I apologise, I missed the beginning to it, but I was thinking about the temperature of the water or the environment in which these products are released. How much does that impact it, and how much do we know about it? Is that an area? Because that applies not just to manufacturing, but it also applies to, for example, animal agriculture when we're spreading manure in the environment. We need to understand what inhibits the breakdown.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Mandy, I think I've heard someone come off mute, so if I could come back to that, because I think that's a really good question. Do we have anyone coming to speak about the gaps in technology available in the market that helps with discharge treatment? Please go ahead. Hear them.
Can't hear them.
Okay.
Can you please type on the chat, please?
There are a few questions from our audience, which we have in the question and answers section. So if you would like to address them now.
Yeah, if we can come back to that in one moment, Faizan. I just want to see if we can really hone in on the audience. Just one more try. So we have some audience participation. We've got 15 people in the room online. And we've got a question that I would like to ask if industry can provide their view on this for us as part of the UK government delegation. So when you're treating wastewater or you're managing the discharge coming from antibiotic production at your manufacturing sites, do you see any gaps in technology that you would like to highlight for potential investment opportunities for collaboration between India and UK? Can I ask if, I see some people starting to drop off. They maybe not want to, but anyone from the audience that is online that sees any gaps in technology? You can take yourself off mute and speak out loud. We should be able to hear you. Be brave.
Courtney, can you hear me?
I can, Louise. Yes, thank you.
Oh, this works now. Maybe I can just add a bit of flavour to this question,
Please do.
because I think we're really keen from the UK government to understand how we can make this easier for industry to comply with this standard, and whether there are gaps in the technology side of things and the innovation side of things that we can help fill, because we obviously can't fund the compliance them, but we can encourage innovation and support innovation in this space. But we're really keen to understand exactly where those gaps are, because if we don't know, we can't tailor the support to develop that technology to fill those gaps. So it's a really important question for us to hear from manufacturers themselves as to where there might be gaps that we can help fill, and or just make technology cheaper where it might be already available, but where it might be possible to either retrofit or develop alternatives on the same basis that become cheaper. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. Again, if I can maybe ask if there's anyone in the audience that would like to respond directly online, just take yourself off mute.
If not, Courtney, maybe people can submit their feedback to offline. That might be an easier way of doing it.
It may be an easier way. I just thought I'd give them a chance. But yeah, also using the chat box. We also have the chat box, so feel free to just write any technology gaps or any technology you're finding useful that maybe needs scaling, is costly. So if you could use the chat box as well as an alternative. I know we have an industry representative in the room. Don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts? No. Okay. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, are they only limited to human facilities producing human antibiotics? And that's why designed for you. But I don't see why can't we have a standard. So why would there be to follow the separation?
Yeah, good question. So the original scope, I think, was focused because human health antibiotics directly related to the discharge, and then us developing resistance to the antibiotics that we are treated with. We are now looking to expand it to also veterinary medicines and veterinary antibiotics, so animal use antibiotics as well. We've been engaging with a number of animal health trade associations and manufacturers to ask if their relevance of this, and the process is the same, right? Yeah. The process to control the discharge is the same. So to answer your question directly, the standard is applicable, and we're looking about how we can also apply the certification to that type of antibiotic production as well. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
It can be applied to both even individual facility, for example, non-human use. Why it is to human use? Because the standard is brainchild of AMR Industry Alliance. So they are largely, let's say, producing antibiotics for human use. So until you have, veterinary drug producer, antibiotic producer, there are specific veterinary antibiotics, right? So it was very difficult for industry lines to include that. So it's very clear even in standard could be even accepted by them. Talking from my experience point of view, even this could also be adopted by STPs, sewage treatment plant, in a way confining to their treatment facility, and even it is not yet adopted by common effluent treatment plant. It won't still not falling into the ambit of that scope of that. That could also be extended to that. Reason being, if we look at industry, about 50%, I'm just giving a guess, estimate, 50% of wastewater goes to common effluent treatment plant. And they get from antibiotic plants, they get from non-antibiotic plants as well. So it's important that also applies over there. So I think in my view, it is a fight against AMR in manufacturing environment. So this is one classic example. I would say still a pilot in antibiotic industry. We show that there can be some standard which could establish that AMR can be prevented.
Yeah, good question. Manish, go ahead.
I have a comment. Now we have enough body of evidence which shows that how non-antibiotic drugs do have an impact on the microbiota itself.
Mm.
So instead of, of course, this is a very essential to have the standards for PNEC values and everything to be put in place for the antibiotics alone. But I think it's very important to look at other chemical moieties which impact the natural flora. And if they are released as well, I think the standards should be, it's a comment, basically, to be extended and to include all the therapeutic area drugs as well, where they should be at the peak.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So the broader pie topic, pharmaceuticals and the environment, could be referenced here, right? So pharmaceutical organizations, antibiotic or not, are looking at measuring and calculating dilution rates of their discharge of chemicals overall, and are using PNEC values to do that. So one of the challenges we've gotten from the industry is, could this be broader than antibiotics? The answer is the standard and the best practices outlined it absolutely could be applied to wider production of other medicines. However, we kept it really focused to start, and we will continue to keep it very focused to start. I think maybe in 18 months, we may broaden it to the wider pie topic, but because we want to tie it directly to the public health challenge of resistance and to antimicrobials, we're keeping it focused to antibiotics initially. But I'm already in conversations with some trade associations to see how would it be, what would, or if it would need to be changed to have a broader application to pie pharmaceuticals in the environment, which are affecting the natural environment, not only public health, to your question.
Because the cutoff values is very important.
What
is the PNEC we need to do?
It is there. They call it ecotoxicity.
Yeah.
Ecotoxicity value. So when we decide on PNEC, we look at two values. One is MIC, minimum inhibition concentration. So doctors understand very well that inhibition concentration, where no visible bacterial growth happens. Right? That's a susceptibility test. Another is ecotoxicity, means how it is affecting, as you said, to the microorganism in the water. So which is the most strictest is taken up as PNEC. But for each and every, either it's antibiotic or non-antibiotic, there is ecotoxicity values, right? A, B. For market authorization in Europe, called it ECHA, So in that case, there is also requirement to give this data. It's so yes,
it's true.
Now, coming to question has on breakdown of let's say molecule and antibiotic. She had that question.
Yeah, sorry,
right?
Mandy. Go ahead. Sorry, Mandy. I didn't mean to.
So
no, it's good.
No, I'll come back to you. For each and every molecule, when the innovation happens or research happens, even after that, there is a requirement in Europe if they go for registration. Largely Indian companies too, they call it chemical characterization. What we do, we see there, how does acid impact it? How does it break then into the active moiety breaks down, right? So it is no more active. Impact of bases like sodium hydroxide, impact of UV light, impact of sunlight, impact of temperature. So all those factors are very well studied. They are known. For an example, for example, if I want to know how atorvastatin, which is not antibiotic, how does it get degraded? What are those chemicals or what are those ways to degrade it? It is well established. Those publications are available. Other than the molecules which are quite old, that study did not happen at that point of time. Yeah. So those pathways are known.
Can I just come back in on that? So those are laboratory studies.
Yeah.
But in the actual environment, when they're in waste of animals, how does that?
Sorry, can you come again?
In waste product or in sewage, for example, those studies are presumably laboratory studies rather than in field. Do we have any evidence of how the broken down field?
Yeah, I think it is something which is shaded area, gray area. I don't see there are studies available, but on the other side, there are studies how a molecule behaves in aqueous environment. High pH, low pH is available, so that scientific logic can be applied. But still, certain antibiotics are very stubborn, like ciprofloxacin, chloroquinolone, base antibiotics. They are very stiff. It's very difficult to degrade. They could only be degraded in a very conditioned environment. They won't be effective. That's why they get detected in rivers. We find over there.
Yes, go ahead, Martin, and then I think we'll take one question from here as well. We got in the chat. Yeah.
Can you tell a bit more about the range of stability? Look at the antibiotics as a whole, as a group. And are we talking about, well, the great degradation within minutes, and sometimes within days or weeks or months? What's the range?
See, the stability.
Just to repeat the question, so the question was around stability and the range of stability for antibiotics across the board. Go ahead.
Would you like to answer?
No, I would like you to.
Yeah. See, for any antibiotic, all the antibiotic stability studies are conducted. Okay. So when that molecule, that antibiotic is stored under those conditions, for example, there are 4 zones: zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, as per GMP, CGMP, right? So those stability studies are performed as long as those antibiotics are under those conditions, so they have a long life. It could be 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. For example, atorvastatin, statins go to 5 year, amoxicillin also goes to 5 year, ampicillin goes to 5 year, and even penicillin go to 3 year like that.
It's active for 3 years.
Active ingredient, I'm talking active ingredient. They will remain active. So they have very long shelf life under those conditions.
Shelf life.
But when
Yeah.
they are not inside within those storage conditions, right? They can degrade. They can degrade. It again depends. Is it extreme temperature? Is it humid environment and all that? For that, let me tell you, company has to conduct excursion studies. For example, I produce in India, then I send a pilot truck across India without giving any storage condition. Then it comes back to my facility, then we test it. What is the degradation? Is it again complying to pharmacopoeia requirement or not?
I
So
think the
those tests
question
are there.
I think also is once it's then discharged into the aquatic environment, how long
Will
is
it-
the stability of the antibiotic, as in how long is it
Again,
active?
as I said, it again varies. Antibiotics like penicillin antibiotics, if you go to an environment, let's say they're very unstable, they get degraded faster, penicillin based. But in penicillin class, there is a class of, let us say, semi-synthetic cephalosporin, they're very stable.
They can stay in the water like that weeks.
They can stay weeks or like that, weeks or so, right? And as I said, fluoroquinolone, they could be more stable. It again depends, moiety to moiety. Yeah.
See, that's the reason. In fact, the dilution factor also comes into place.
Yeah.
I
So
think
when you look at the validity or the longevity of that particular antibiotics, which is going to go into the environment, either in the land or in the sea, or so the dilution factor. At what dilution that we will see that the active ingredient of the antibiotics is totally nullified.
So that is the only logic where there is a dilution factor. If it gets the effect of dilution is see, if that dilution is less than
Courtney, we can't hear you.
There we go. I've been unmuted now. So I think there was one other question around related to any timeline for the certification requirement and tenders in the EU and the UK. So just one comment is, and then we're going to have to wrap this up because I know we're after time. But Mandy, Joanna, we'll come to you for your last question as well. So the EU and then, well, I'm going to say the Nordics tender requirement where 30% of the weighting is being attributed to environmental criteria, and the antibiotic tenders for legacy antibiotics is live now. And the certification therefore is the highest score in those antibiotic tenders currently. It went live this month. So you can expect that, and we're already seeing some trickle effects happening from incoming requests to conform to that tender requirement. The UK is in consultation right now. So the weighting of novel antibiotic subscription model related to how much the environment is going to be weighted is to be confirmed. There is some legacy tenders that are out there currently where there is requests for independent assessment to the antibiotic manufacturing standard, but it's fairly ad hoc right now. So that is live currently, and it has been since 2022, but it's not consistent. But Joanna, maybe we ask one question, then Manish, I know you want to kind of give some closing words, but one.
What happens with this waste that carries antibiotics from either manufacturers or hospitals or domestic use, because it comes to the wastewater treatment. And do they have actual processes to remediate antibiotics? And if not, did they actually measure it? Because if they don't measure and don't remediate, it's probably the same concentration at inflow and outflow, and then we are drinking that, right?
Yeah, so the question was related to where and how water concentrations are measured in a wastewater treatment or a hospital environment or sewage environment. So it varies by environment. I think where the current onus and responsibility of understanding concentrations to prevent high concentrations is on in a manufacturing environment is one of the best understood. Hospitals and dilution rates coming from hospitals and what happens after that is a bit of a black hole right now. There are some academic studies happening in that area. I mean, we saw some related to sewage and understanding concentration levels of sewage from human excretion or animals excretion, and that was evidenced, I think, through the study that you showed us yesterday, Manish. So there's some academic, studies being done related to sewage and concentration levels there. But that's just my answer. I think manufacturing environments, the onus is on the manufacturer to prevent higher levels of concentration before it gets to the treatment facility. Sure. So the question,
there is one
just for real quick, the question is at the wastewater treatment facility, what is being done to remove the high concentrations there?
One first important thing is that, many organizations, whenever they are manufacturing antibiotics, they first are treated as red category. Now, there is a consent which has been given to them to see to it before they discharge to the land or to the river or any of those kind of things. There are some specific requirements that they need to abide. Without that, they do not allow them to. So there is a consent which is given by the Pollution Control Board to the industries as such. That is one check that they're doing. And for the hospitals and this thing about it, now they have actually come out with what you call the wastewater waste management. There are some private entities and also the other industries that have come out with this waste. So any waste which is coming out from the hospitals are to be only given to these people. They are not allowed to just
they're waste disposal vendors,
disposals and all of those kind of things. And they have some sort of control, not 100% as such, where there are not much of audit or witnessing about it. But there is a way, there is a mechanism, but how it is being treated, what has been happening with regard to it, the answers for that particular thing is still awaited. on those particular.
I'm going to have to wrap us up, unfortunately. We're over time, and I think we're going to have to close the session. So I want to thank everyone for hanging with us online. I appreciate your attention, albeit we didn't get anyone to get to the participation, but thank you very much for your listening, and we look forward to following up with some of the questions that we had from the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.